Great. It's 1 past the hour, so I think we can start soon. I can still see people coming in, but perhaps we can start with some introductions and wait to see if a few more people are joining. I'll start with introducing myself. My name is Zoe Flood. I'm hosting this on behalf of the Frontline Freelance Register and also the Frontline Club. The Frontline Freelance Register is an initiative of the Frontline Club to support freelance journalists working on the front lines in sort of all sorts of definitions of a front line. We have done similar kind of safety conversations before as FFR, including with Fabio at the beginning of the pandemic. We spoke about how to cover COVID safely. So it's great to have Fabio back today. Just by way of quick introduction, Fabio, you're a reporter, a photojournalist. You have worked throughout a range of humanitarian emergencies and conflicts across the world, including in Libya, Syria, various African countries, elsewhere in the Middle East. You have spent the last 2 years covering COVID, mostly with the New York Times. You took some very celebrated and powerful photography at the beginning of the pandemic in your native Italy, for which you've received a number of awards. And you have most recently been reporting in Ukraine for a number of Italian and other European media outlets. So when you mentioned that you'd been there and that you'd had some important safety experiences to share, we were keen to organize a webinar to talk about this, to open it up to questions from the audience. And we're very grateful to have you. Thank you for taking the time. Just to let everyone know, this is being recorded. So if you do ask questions and want to be anonymized, just let me know that when you ask the question, and we'll do that. So over to you, Fabio. Perhaps you could start by telling us a little bit about when you went to Ukraine and where and for whom you were reporting, and then we can go into some of the details about your experiences and your particularly your experiences around safety and what you can share with other freelancers working in the region or planning to travel there.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Zoe, for the introduction. Yeah, it was my first point to try to share my experience with you. So that's the reason why I called my friend from Frontline Freelance Register to try to spread what was my experience on the ground working in Ukraine. I went in the country as soon as the Russian invasion started. I mean, it was the 24th of February when the started invasion, and the time I was in it was funny because I was in the airport waiting for my flights, and the flight has been canceled because the invasion started. So I arranged another way to get into the country. I reached the country 2 days later. I fly from Italy to Poland, and after I entered through Lviv and I moved to Kiev a couple of days later. I've been working as photographer for Zeit, German platform, and also for the Italian newspaper Il Fatto Quotidiano. And for the first time in my life, I've been contracted for working also for Italian television for the public service called the RAI. It was RAI 3 in Italy. So this also influenced on the way I've been working this time on the field. So first of all, talking about safety and talking about the responsibilities of journalists to working on the ground, I would like to divide the responsibilities between journalists and platform that assign you. I mean, television, magazine, or newspaper. So this is two different topics I would like to talk with you today. And if you have any kind of question also about logistic question or more detailed question about what kind of safety, please feel free to ask Zoe your question. So When I entered the country, the western side of the country was pretty quiet, so there were not bombing or artillery in Lviv, where I spent the first night over there. And entering the country was pretty easy. So I think this is basically one of the reasons now a lot of journalists enter and start working in Ukraine, because in the first is close to Europe, it's easy to get into the country, and also not so expensive as other conflict zones. So this pushed journalists and freelancers to enter and to start to work in Ukraine, and this is perfect. One important point is that before entering in a conflict zone, we as a freelancer or journalist have to be prepared. We cannot just start to be prepared the same day we decided to start working on the ground. So the preparation starts before. What does it mean? Just having your own equipment. Don't wait for everybody that give you the equipment for free, or just find a helmet inside the country. But it's also very important to be prepared in the way that you have everything you need with you. So this is about equipment. And when I talk about equipment, I'm talking about a vest, bulletproof, with plates, different kind of plates are possible to use, and also helmet. And also for helmet, there are different kind of level of helmet. If you are interested, we can go deeper in this aspect or not. And also the medical kit is something that's also very important. And for being prepared to having a medical kit on the ground, you need to do a medical training before. Medical training is that kind of training that can last 2-3 days until a week, that professional and to teach you how to react when something happens in conflict zone. From using a tourniquet if they shot you and your leg is bleeding, or just how to move when a mortar shelling down, or if they sequester, some just all the things that basically you need, from medical aspect to logistical aspect on the ground. So this is something important. Personally, I did one in New York in the Bronx Documentary Center. It was the risk training that Mike Camber and other people decided to launch when Timur Chris were killed in 2011 in Libya. And after, I also hosted this same training in Italy. So people and professional come from New York to do this kind of training in Italy in my gallery in Turin. So this want to say that it's very important, guys, to be prepared. It's not about I know how to do, because when you are on the ground, everything is different. The tension, the stress is different. So you have to be clear in your mind how to react, because your mind is not clear as you are far from the ground. So this is also important to refresh after a while, because there are, if you are not a medical or doctor, probably something just you can lose along the time. And this is basically the aspect that you need to have before entering in a conflict zone.
Fabio, just to jump in there, in your experience, given the relative accessibility of getting into Ukraine, how prepared would you say media operators are there? Would you say that there's a big discrepancy in standards of preparedness, that there are people without the necessary equipment, without the necessary training? And what do you think that means in terms of both the individual responsibility on the part of journalists, but also on the platforms and what material they're using.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I personally saw with my own eyes, and I had to try to help with my experience the people that have no real idea how to work conflict zone. And when I say people, I mean journalists. And this is, I don't want to say the name of the journalist, neither the platform they were working for, but I found people totally with no experience, with no idea, with no equipment, and only with the idea to try to go closer to get the best picture. When I was working in Irpin and I spent a month in Kiev and working around in surrounding, there were people that just arrived and the day after just jumped in the car and went to Irpin. There were people that doing this kind of stuff just cross a Russian front line, a Russian checkpoint. Nothing happened to this guy, but this is so very, also very dangerous. So another important thing is try to, when you arrive in these kind of places, try to understand what is going on and try to spend probably a couple of days to understand the movement, the logistic, try to find a driver with a car that if you are more than two people have 4 doors so that everybody can get out from the car immediately. So I mean, there are some kind of logistic aspect that is better to have clear before jumping on the front line. So jumping on the car that you don't know who is driving the car, it's quite risky.
And just in terms of, sorry, we're working around Kiev, maybe just for the benefit of the people listening. I mean, you were there for around a month. Could you maybe just explain how often you were having to cross checkpoints or cross the front line, or how you were navigating that? Because obviously it was a very fluid and dangerous situation. What were your decisions around how to navigate that, those decision making on your part?
Sure. So talking about checkpoint, I mean, the situation on the ground is very fluid, so it changed. Now I'm talking about the first month of conflict, because just a few days I went back home, and I went back home for some reason. And one of the reasons is because after a time working on the ground, my perception of danger just changing. So my deadline is around a month, can be a week more, a week before, but this is one also the reason why I come back. And so it's full of checkpoint. Kiev was full of checkpoint. And to move on the checkpoint easily, to don't be stuck on the checkpoint, you need like accreditation card. Accreditation was important to work in Ukraine right now and was important also in the beginning. So it was not so immediately for me to get the accreditation, and also for the people, journalists working on the ground. Now looks like the process is faster. But the accreditation help you to move on the checkpoint easily, because there were a lot of fear of spy or Russian spy and saboteur. So the work of journalists on the ground was not so easy. You have been, they can stop you several times a day. And with accreditation, everything is easier because the accreditation come directly for the ministry. So they check your name. And more than one time, they call the ministry to check again my name, even if I had accreditation. So this is also an important point. And for having the accreditation, you need your document and all this kind of stuff, picture, but also you need a letter from your magazine or newspaper that are signing you. So this means that you are, most of the people have been assigned for magazine or paper, the people that have the accreditation. So if you are assigned, the responsibility that you as a journalist have on the ground, you gonna split these responsibilities with your media platform, even if it's newspaper or television or magazine. Because if they assign you, they have to like have like have to know how to treat you. So they have to give you the insurance. So the magazine or newspaper that assign you, they have to do the insurance for you. And if they don't do the insurance, so ask for it. So ask for the media that assign you for insurance. This is also important. What kind of insurance? Also on this topic, we can talk a while on this topic, but we can share you after the call a couple of insurance that as a freelancer you can suggest to your magazine or newspaper. And if you are not assigned, make your own insurance. And when you sell the, so this gonna, so it's matter of money. I know, because the insurance I did was more than 400 euros a week. So you have to also consider this money when some newspaper or magazine buy your photos or ask for to write an article, because this is not very fair that they decided to not assign you, but they are buying stuff from you. So they have to pay like a hazardous fee. It's not a normal fee. So just ask for your newspaper or magazine a different fee for working in conflict zone, because you had more expenses. Just consider that the driver cost $2,000 or euros, 200, sorry guys, $200, and it's quite enough, by the way, $200 or euros a day. An hotel can cost $100 a day, so you already spent 300 more the insurance divided 400 divided for 7 days. You're gonna spend around with food around 400 a day. So this is the cost. For sure, if working as freelancer, you can split expenses like a driver or this kind of stuff, but they're starting to be also expensive working in Ukraine. And also, this is my suggestion, that if you are not well prepared with equipment, so if you have not your insurance, I personally think that newspaper and magazine do not have to buy your pictures, do not have to buy your text or videos. So it's also responsibilities from the platform to work with the people that work in, let me say, in safety way.
So just to come back to that, Fabio, in terms of what you think a platform should be checking that a journalist is working with, as a bare minimum, it should be whether they're assigned or whether they're selling or whether they're buying photos or material. It should be a bare minimum, in your view, of PPE, personal protective equipment, insurance for the individual, and sufficient funding in some form, whether it's hazard pay on the purchase or it's daily expenses allowance from the platform. You think that should be the bare minimum that a platform's insisting on and checking that is there? I mean, is there anything else that you think they should be, should be on the mandatory checklist for a platform or a media outlet to make sure that a journalist working there has?
Just to provide this kind of equipment if the journalists don't have this kind of equipment and the platform want to work with these journalists. So if the journalists don't have helmet, find a way to or give the money to the journalist to rent an helmet or whatever. But as I told you so before, I think that covering conflict just start before entering on the ground and entering the countries. So yeah, this is what I suggest. I think the list is fine.
And in your experience of speaking to colleagues on the ground in Ukraine, how comprehensively are platforms requesting this? We've had one question from Gabriele asking if the German editorial staff were concerned about these details. I mean, just maybe more generally in the in your experience and talking to colleagues in Ukraine, how universal is it that platforms are asking or making sure that journalists have access to all of these safety requirements, making sure that journalists have done safety training, medical training, and that they are paying properly? Without naming names, would you say that the majority of platforms are doing this, or are there mixed bag?
I think that is something that start changing, Zoe. I cannot tell you that majority of the platform now ask for safety equipment, but it's something that is start changing. And it's some kind of responsibility also that the platform are considering. And sometimes the platform just want to buy your stuff and are not interested. And we as the journalist, it's difficult to say, no, I will not sell my photos because I have not equipment with me, you know what I mean? So it's a responsibility to the platform, and I hope that this can be something that can change. Like personally, I start seeing this change. I cannot, as I said, that the majority, but there are then the most respectful platform that work in this way. And I think it's fair.
And just coming to the sort of more general experience you had in Ukraine, how would you say it's different to other conflicts that you've covered? I mean, for people who maybe, there are people who might be considering traveling there. For those of us who are just interested in that, what the media experience was there, how was it for you compared to other experiences you've had?
So this question is not only about safety, but can be about politically answered, So, I mean, there are some similarity and a lot of difference. The difference is not like it was Syria, it was Aleppo, it was not like it was Libya. There is not until now guerrilla. That's the reason why there are not like a lot of frontline images with people shooting, because in the first phase of the invasion, there were artillery and missile shelling from quite far. So the risk can be totally random. So a residential building hit by Russian missiles, and more than one, more than 2 or 3 or 4. It also suggested us to try to find a safety location for sleeping, also for spending time. I always suggest not to move on the ground alone, but move with a colleague. Can be the colleague of your newspaper or whatever, or just a freelancer, because being in two, this can be helpful, because if something happened to one of the two, the other can just call a ring for help, or this kind of stuff. So also it's important where your hotel is located, going or where your personal apartment is located. For sure, if your personal apartment is closer to the front line or closer to, in that situation, Irpin, you are closer to the conflict. So this can be in one way interesting journalist talking, but can be super dangerous. There is not one picture that deserves your life. So try to find an hotel in the second or third line or at least 5-7 kilometers from the place they are shooting. So it's also important. Try to understand where the shelter and the bunker are located. If something happens, just move over there to it yourself. So this little point that can very helpful if something immediately change, because this conflict, different from the other conflict that I covered, was the time and how fast the things were changing on the ground. when you were covering the Free Syrian Army resisting Assad regime in Aleppo in 2012, there were a front line, or more than a front line. There were a sniper way, you know, there were a sniper way over there. So if there is a front, you stay on this side. Also in Libya, there were a front. The front was moving. This is the reason why some journalists were captured, but there were a front. For sure, if you're stuck in the middle when the front is moving, you risk your life because the other just come in and can get you. But in this case, there's no clear front line. So just wear your bulletproof jacket, even if you are not listening incoming bullets, because it's not clear exactly where the front line is. When I was working in Kiev and surrounding, there were a front on Irpin, Bucha, there were a front on the north, west side, there were a front on the east side of Brovary. There were several fronts, and day after day, the front and the road were changing. There is like a big road that join Lviv with Kiev that from one day to another day have been cut by Russian army. So there are checkpoints that are changing every day. So the situation is very fluid. And after a month spending on the ground, and when a journalist has been killed in Irpin, the Major Irpin and Ukrainian army forbidden journalists to get into the city. But just after a few weeks, there were tours for journalists going to Irpin. So, and Bucha, so the situation changed a lot. This means that you have to understand this situation, try to talk with the local people, local journalists. It's also very important point because they know better than you how is the situation on the ground. Just try to, you can talk with them and understand better how can be your day, if going to this front line can be too risky or not, if the Russian just were moving or not. So yeah.
Thanks, Fabio. That's very helpful. And just to jump in and say, if anyone has questions, please do put them in the chat. Someone just posted and asked if that was possible, and I'll Simon, I will get to your question just now. On the issue of information, which you're sort of touching on at this point about how you're finding out what's going on in a very fluid situation, you mentioned talking to local people, talking to local journalists. I mean, without revealing any specific sources of your own, what were the other kinds of tools that you were using to find out what was going on in such a ever-changing situation?
Yeah, this is something that I'm very proud of. Being a freelancer, we have a family of freelancers, Zoe. As you know better than me, it's also the Frontline Freelance Register, it's a family of freelancers. That if I need an help from you, you're gonna give me the help. If I need the help from me, I'm gonna give you the help. So we share information. We spend time together sharing information. Probably we can be in the same hotel and we have like some kind of dinner, because we didn't have like proper dinner, but some kind of dinner together sharing information. So don't be afraid to ask, even can be or can appear like not very interesting question, but don't be fear to ask again and again to your colleagues. So this is very important point. Being a freelancer since 2011, did I start working in conflict zone, I sharing information and everything basically on the ground with the family of freelancer. And this helped me to not feel alone, you know. This is super important. So keep your family of freelancer with your earth. I'll help them because they also gonna help you. And this is how family members work, you know.
And coming back to, thank you for that. And coming back to the sort of logistics and the preparation that you could do beforehand. I mean, you talked about protective equipment and medical equipment and so on. Are there any other practical tips you could share about what to carry with you for people traveling there? Obviously, it's looked extremely cold, and some of the environmental conditions, also access to food and so on, seems to have been quite difficult in different areas. Are there any sort of general tips in terms of keeping yourself healthy and well, as well as safe in the sort of security sense? Is there anything you could share on that front?
Yeah, that also depends of the moment, because when I arrived in Kiev, there were not a lot of gasoline around, and there were not a lot of food. The supermarket where some of them were empty, some of there were a lot of people. So it's also important to try to get some food and some water, because let's imagine that I spent a month in my hotel where there were only breakfast, so there were no lunch or dinner. So we had a small frigorifero, small fridge in my hotel room, and so when we arrived, before we arrived, because we got the water, we got a lot of water in Lviv, and we bring the water in the train to have water in Kiev. So having probably was we were worried a lot to not find water in Kiev, but it makes sense. At the time it was making sense, bring you the water and bring you the minimal few days of food. So we did, and we enter in the train from Lviv to Kiev with a lot of bottle of water and a lot of food. So this is also an important point. Let's imagine if they gonna circle the city, because during the first 2 or 3 weeks of the invasion, they've been talking of circling the city. So having an escape plan was also, an exit out was also super important. And not only one. We spent days with my colleagues just planning our exit plan number 1, exit plan number 2, and number 3, and have the money, enough money to pay the driver that can bring you out of the city. Because there were people around 20 days after the invasion started that paid 1,200 euros to get out from Kiev to reach the border. This is not what I paid. I paid 400 split with 2 people with a car, but because I decided to leave Kiev like a couple of weeks later. So just be prepared with cash, because the ATM most of the time doesn't work, and even if they work, they can only give you just a short amount of money. So personally, I entered in Ukraine with 3,600, 700 euros. And this was good for a bit more than 20 days. And after I got an assignment from an Italian newspaper, the journalist that arrived in Kiev gave me 2,000 more, just to give you an idea. So it was good idea to bring 4,000, 5,000, because if something happened, just money can help you to get out from the problem.
Thank you for sharing those.
Sorry.
Thank you for sharing that. No, I was going to say thank you for sharing those specific numbers, because I think it's often hard for people to imagine. So you were essentially, you were looking at the region of 6,000 euros for the month, for the full month that you were there. That was the kind of...
A little bit less, because I went back with some money around 1,600, 700. So basically,
you had the safety margin, you had the extra in case you needed it.
Yeah. So basically, I spent around 4,000 for a month, a little excluding flights and these kind of out to reach the country. I mean, I'm talking only about in the country. And this is also something that, as you said, is important because not a lot of people are sharing numbers, you know. But it's important to know how the driver can cost a day. And I paid 150 for the first week or 10 days. And after, as the gasoline raised the price, the driver asked me for 200 a day. So having like emerging like some money more can be also helpful for you to work easily, because if you are spending 3 days, it's important. I mean, if you are spending 3 weeks, it's important to work 3 weeks or at least 2.5. And yeah, and very important to have the plane to get out from the trouble. And this can be in every kind of conflict you are interested to cover.
Thanks, Fabio. And in terms of, you said, you know, if you're there for 3 weeks, you want to be working for 2.5. I mean, you want to have the facility, the money, the resources to do that. But is there, I know you were working on assignment, but based on what you saw, is there enough work? Are there so many people there that there's not enough sales to make, or is the appetite very high? I guess there's a concern also that people may travel and find that there is not enough work available and then have put themselves in a very difficult situation without sufficient resources.
Can you be more accurate with your question? Because I'm not very sure that I understand you. You are asking me if 3 weeks is enough to get enough money, basically, when you are working in conflict zone, because it's not easy to get an assignment. So 3 weeks can be not enough time and you need more time.
No, more, sorry if that wasn't clear. More that in Ukraine right now, are there so many journalists and freelancers there? Are people finding that they can earn enough money to protect themselves? Is there enough work for them to have the resource to protect themselves?
Yeah. So my question is, what are you doing there? Yeah, I don't want to be rude, so but I cannot. If you are journalist, for sure, because if you are doctor or NGO worker, you have another reason to be there. But if you are a journalist, you are not working on the ground. I mean, for sure, you can get few days off. That's normal. But if you are not working on the ground, which is the reason you are staying in the ground. So if they are not assigned you, okay. But when you are there, if you do not find an assignment to keep working there, so probably, I don't want to be rude, but I cannot understand the real reason why you are there. So you are not informing because your image are not published and you are not working. So are you doing this for you, or why you are in these kind of places?
In your experience, was this the case in Ukraine? I mean, there seems to be a lot of people who have traveled there. You know, thousands have, I think I saw a figure saying 2,000 people had registered with the accreditation body. That's a lot of journalists to be moving around in that space.
See, yeah, basically this is the reason why we are trying to give some tips for platforms to do not work with improvised journalists, and to journalists do not be in there if you are improvised journalist. So this is basically our audience. And if there are some word junkie that have no real idea, and this is not the way we are used to work. So I know perfectly that 2000, it's a lot. It's a huge number. Let's see between these 2000 that who are working. And if you are not working on the ground, and I cannot realize the reason why you are there. To get a portfolio, I'm talking seriously, which can be the reason if you are in conflict, you are journalist for sure. We are not talking about other kind of job. But if you are journalist, you have to bring some evidences about what is going on. So this is important to be published and to be some kind of platform that can give the voice to your images or to your text. So this is the work. And the problem is when this kind of work is not working properly, because as we have been talking before, there are some platforms that send no journalist, we send journalists with no experience. So this our audience, journalists and platforms and media outlet that are working conflict. But for the people that just going there with no idea, I suggest to not going there, basically. Not going there. Because also on the information side, not only safety for these people, but only about information side. We don't need like our eye and our earth can be saturated easily for thousands of images or thousands of text with no real meaning. So we have to be accurate on what kind of information we are working, what kind of images. Are you covering the breaking news? Are you doing like in-depth story? Are you working on documentary? What kind of product you are working with? Is it necessary? Is it important? What kind of audience can you reach? What kind of information you can give to your audience? Why you and not other man or woman are covering this topic? Why you are engaged with this topic? These are a lot of questions that we as journalists have to answer before going in a conflict zone.
Thank you. That's a very, very important point. Why is it? Why should you be there? Coming to some questions from the audience, and please, if anyone else would like to share some thoughts or questions, please put them in the chat. But let me put two questions to you, Fabio. They're practical questions. One is about your evacuation plan. How can you make that before you go in, or is there any way you can do it before you enter the conflict zone? When are you making that plan? And the second question is, when you're photographing members of the military, how do you approach that situation? And I imagine that the person who asked the question means Ukrainian military in this instance.
Yeah, definitely. So the first was about evacuation plan. As I told you before, the situation on the ground changed very fast. So you can try to reach people that are working on the field before you are going there, to try to understand how is the situation, if they can share you contact, if they belong to your family of freelancer. But as the situation is changing very fast, personally, I did the evacuation plan the first day I was in Kiev, because at the time it was also easy, because my first like evacuation plan was the train that was running at the time. So I entered with the train that were running, but finally I get out with car for other reason and several reasons, but it was my second choice. And I have different car with different drivers that offered to bring me out. So you have to be also clear with the people that working with you about your plan. And something that I didn't tell before, that if you're working with the driver or with the fixer, try to be responsible for his safety also. This means that if you are assignment, you can also add to the newspaper or to your platform to bring, to give like a vest, the bullet on the helmet for your driver or fixer working with you. This is matter of responsibility, so because probably in Ukraine at least everything was changed like immediately in few days. So the people were not used to conflict. So a lot of people have no vest, and there were needs of vest in the country. So that's also a reason why the Frontline, if I remember well, just start offering vest to people in Lviv. And yeah, so this was about the exit plan. And the other question was about the military, if I remember well. So how you get a picture of military. It's not easy to work, basically. It was not easy to work in Kiev because, as you perfectly know, there were a lot of propaganda on both sides on this invasion. So as a journalist, you need to see the real facts, because we are there to trying to find the truth. As a journalist and conflict, the truth is hidden. So our role is trying to follow this line, and it was not easy at all to enter hospital or to enter morgue because the Ukrainian didn't allow you to enter until they decided to leave people to journalists to enter. So we have to be also very accurate on what kind of images we are doing and when we are doing. So as a photographer, I need to enter where there are casualties of war, because also war is a matter of death, of casualty, of pain, and we have to document all this kind of stuff. But as probably a Ukrainian, you don't want to show your you want to show your victims, because showing victims means you are like human, you are not a superhero, it's a fragile side. So it's also important in this conflict, but in all the wars, ask on what kind of images you are doing. And even if you are covering the invasion on the Russian side, what kind of images you are doing, what kind of images they allow you to shoot. Is this true? Is this propaganda? This is very important for a professional journey, to ask this question every day and to try to answer the question about access to make picture of the military. If you have the permit, basically they tell you if you can or if you can't. If you do not have the permit, it's basically impossible to go in military places or get a picture of military. If you have the permit, it's not sure that you can get that picture, but you have the chance to ask, because the ministry already check your accreditation and know perfectly who you are. So yeah.
Great, thank you, Fabio. And just to collate two questions that have come through, I mean, they both fall under the issue of digital security and digital, ability to operate digitally. And that's something I was going to come to as well. How accessible is Starlink? Is it everywhere? What are conditions like for getting online, for transferring files? And how did you work to protect your digital security?
Okay, so also this can change like immediately. If you are covering the conflict on the south, you have different kind of connection that if you are in Kiev of Irpin, for example, as I was working also for the Italian television, and I had to do like some streaming 2 times a day for the telegiornale, the ITG, the information. And what I did was buying a SIM card. This is what I suggest for around 10 euros. You can buy a SIM card with all internet access. And this help you to file or also with the protection you are using. You are not sharing line in hotel or whatever. You can go in tethering or your mobile. So this is something that I suggest, and also it's super easy to work with all the application because it was going good. I remember there was a LifeCell or Vodafone was the two main card available that I suggest. LifeCell I was working with and was good. But for example, when the Russians start firing and struggling to Irpin, in Irpin there were no connection at all because they've been firing, they destroyed the infrastructure. So there were no connection. This was also a problem to evacuate civilians, to find people inside of the city, and for sure also for filing or doing streaming session with your mobile was impossible because there were no line. But was not the main problem of this conflict. If the question is, do I have to bring with me a big gun for filing images and text? Until now, I can say no. You don't need it. For sure, if you have, can be fine, but probably you wouldn't use it until now. For sure, if you are in Mariupol, things are different, totally different. But I'm talking about my experience. The connection was pretty good, and I didn't have a lot of problem with connection. Only when they destroyed the infrastructure in Irpin was not possible to talk and to navigate on internet.
And just to reiterate, one of the audiences asked again, did you use Starlink at all? Was that something that you saw or used, the Starlink access?
No, personally I didn't.
And in terms of digital security, was that something that you were concerned about? You mentioned not using the hotel Wi-Fi. Were there other circumstances that you preferred to protect your connection, or that you made special arrangements for your own, I guess, your own location services? I assume you're turning off a lot of those elements.
Yeah, let's depend if you are thinking on your cyber securities for the Ukrainian. Basically, they know everything about you because if they release the card, they know where you are. But for sure, if you cannot share open connection and you can run with your mobile, can be fine. I didn't have personally problem with security or connection in this moment in Ukraine, but what I can tell you is that depends where you are. If you are in Mariupol, probably things are totally different, and the Russian can cross your signal and bomb you. This is what was happening also in Syria. I remember perfectly that the cybersecurity was a crucial point at the time, using satellite phone because it was easy to crack signal and to spot you. Then if they spot you, they can whatever, you know. But was not personally was not one of the main concern about this conflict in this time.
Thanks, Fabio. And here's another question. One of the audience has asked about, you mentioned what you were paying drivers. Were you working with any other local producers, local journalists in a sort of typically what would be a fixer role? And was that often the same person who was driving you? And how were you navigating that? How were you finding those people? And how were you paying them? I mean, what was the expectations around that? As I imagine there was a lot of demand for people who could perform those roles, who could translate, who could assist, who could production support.
Yeah. So first of all, I think it's important to know who are working with. Don't go with the first one that offer you, because this is also important, the kind of work you want to develop on the ground. If you are doing like in-depth story, or so, this is also very important to be clear with your fixer or driver where you want to go and where you want and where he wants to go, because not all the driver are available to bring you to the front lines, for example. So if you want to go to the front line, just talk with the driver before going to the front line, or with the fixer. Personally, I've been working with several driver, depends of the assignment of the work. And I've been working also with volunteers, because there are a lot of people that want to help journalists on the ground. And I'm logistically talking. And my drivers were speaking English quite fluently. So this was the main point for me, to try to understand what people are saying. And I got the information directly for the television, or for my platform, or for my freelance family. So I didn't need a fixer to develop that kind of story. And I've been working with my driver, with his car that was translating me, and also know the series. One of my driver was a previous producer, so he know the city, know how to work better than the first driver. My first driver was a former civilian defense fighters, so it had other kind of skills. You know, that depend what kind of story also you are working. But it's important to be clear with your driver, and as I said, driver or fixer, I mean the people you are working with, and to take the time the day before you start working with them, to try to get a coffee with with the driver fixer, and to talk about what you are going to do tomorrow. Is this fine for you? Did you get any information of how danger can be the street or this road? Just not push your driver. Okay, I want to go there, let's go there. I don't give a fuck if you are interested or not. So this is also an attitude that can be considered like very bad.
Just on that
and
note,
every day, sorry. So, and try to have this kind of conversation day by day, because as I say, the situation change immediately on the ground. So it's not enough doing this kind of chat the first day and working 20 days, you know. So try to keep your driver or fixer update on your work that you are doing, and this can be good for driver or fixer and also for you.
Thanks, Fabio. Sorry to jump in there. Just to say, and we'll wrap up soon. So if you've got any questions, anyone in the audience, please pop them in the chat now, and we'll try and squeeze them in. But just to follow up on that point you said about having discussions with the team that you're working with, you said you were there for a month. How it seems that you were doing a lot of preparatory work before you went out to take photographs, to do reporting. How often were you spending a day doing preparation, and how often were you spending a day reporting? How did you balance that, the planning versus the reporting?
On the field or before going on the field?
While you were inside Ukraine, because you had to keep, because things were changing so much, you had to keep updating your plans. How often were you sort of stopping to re-plan and start again?
This is something that is totally fluid with the work we are doing. It's a part of the work. The plan can be changed like immediately, and you have to be prepared to change your plan, to go in place another place. So you have to need your equipment all day with you in the car. Even if you are not covering the front line, bring your helmet and vest, because everything can change. It's not about okay, now we're gonna talk, and now we're gonna shoot images. But it's something fluid that you talk and shoot images, and you talk with the phone and try to get information. And when you take a break, it's a fluid kind of work. This is different from what I tell before. Try to have a proper chat with the people working with you. This is a proper chat, but about working and be informed. This is the work of journalists. So if you are working with like a writer, you help each other, and when you finish, get a picture, or you got a call, okay, we can go there or there because this is changing, and let's gonna see with our own eyes, because this is our work, go in a place to see with our own eyes and try to report, to bring evidence about what is going on. So it's happened, and it happened a lot in Ukraine, to go to see with my own eyes and nothing was happening, or the road were blocked, and they told me, and when you back home, you can have a chat with your colleague that, oh, I told you that the road was blocked. Yes, but I need to go to see with my own eyes that the road was cut, because things changed, and it can happen that 2 hours later the road was free. So this is how, and a lot of time the road is cut and you have to come back and you lost 3 hours. Yeah, this is happening a lot. You can lose a lot of time, because if you are going to check the time that you are shooting or the time that you are not shooting, when you're coming back from a conflict, the time you are not shooting, it's always bigger than the time you spend on the ground shooting.
Thanks, Fabio. It's always good to have a reality check about how that works in these situations, that often there's so much other things that need to be managed, as well as the actual work, performing the work itself. There's a couple more questions coming from the audience before we wrap up. One question is about naming some of the insurance companies that cover trips. We mentioned at the beginning that we'll try and share some names. I think you mentioned Insurance for Journalists as one.
Yes, that was the one I did. This was the one we did, Insurance for Journalists, but there is also the Reporter Without Border Insurance that I use another kind of conflict, not now. So these two insurance work fine. I mean, I think they were fine because, thanks God, I never tested them directly, But this is the insurance that we as a freelancer work with a lot.
Yes, and just to add to that, to Chris, who asked the question, I think if you look on the Reporters Sans Frontières website, there's some links there to the insurance that they provide. Insurance for Journalists also has an online page, and a number of the other journalist safety organizations have links to insurance companies that will cover particularly freelancers going into conflict zones. It's quite tricky. There aren't that many providers that are willing to provide this cover. I think another one I've also used before is Battleface Insurance. I'm not sure if they're covering for Ukraine, but it might be worth looking at that. Two more questions to wrap up here, Fabio, and then we can sign off. One question, how do you usually find a driver or a fixer or a local producer? How do you find that person? That's question number one. And then question number two, which we can finish on. What was the hardest thing for you personally while working in Ukraine?
That's a good question to close the panel. Yeah, so how I get contact from for driver and fixer, this comes from personal contact, but also there is a Facebook page called Journalist for Ukraine or something like that, that can help you to providing fixer or driver, because there are a lot of journalists registered, and you can get the feedback also from journalists that have been working previously with this driver or fixer. So if you can register to this page, this can be a good starting point to try to find people and contact. And what are the things? The other things was watching with my own eyes that Russian army start shelling civilians while we're running from shelling. I got pictures of civilians that were escaping from Irpin because they were fighting, raging on in Irpin, and they've been killed from a mortar while they were escaping. And this is total against human being. It is one of the reasons that I risk to enter Irpin to get a picture, to bring some evidences about civilians. I'm not talking about military objects, but civilians. And I'm also very hard for me to accept as a journalist, as a human being, and also as a humanity, that these kind of things can happen, and with just considering some kind of normality. Yeah, in Bucha, you see what was going on in Bucha, and this is terrible. And I also read some comments of people that been saying, we are tired to see these kind of images of corpse and dead body, please. But the problem are not the photographer or the video maker that gets some kind of images, because if this is the reality, and this is the reality that have been documented, and big platform already did investigations. So the problem is the reality that is totally destroyed. And we as a photographer, we have been covered and document this reality and again and again and again, because we cannot, it's not possible to get used of it. So my hard things is consider that we can be used to see conflict and these kind of images of war.
Thank you for sharing those thoughts at the end, Fabio. That's a very powerful note to end on. Thank you to everyone for being here. thank you, of course, to Fabio for sharing your insights, but above all, thank you for all your powerful work that you have been doing and you continue to do. And to everybody who's been here today, we will be sharing this recording. You can look out for it, and if you found it useful, please do pass it on to colleagues. And that just leaves for me to say, on behalf of the Frontline Freelance Register and the Frontline Club, thank you to all of you and to Fabio, and have a very good rest of the day.
Thank you,
Thank
Zoe.
you.
Thank you, everybody. And Zoe, probably if this has been recorded, we can also share the video in these groups. So in order other people that can be interested can look at it. Thank you, Zoe. Thank you, Frontline guys and everybody.